Hi everyone, and welcome to the video lecture, Contemporary Classical and Deterrence Research. This video goes along with chapter 4 of your textbook. In this lecture, we'll discuss modern theories that utilize a deterrence and classical approach. Now, I want to take a minute to review the original deterrence theory, the classical school of criminology. Classical theorists argued that crime was the result of a rational choice, where an offender would weigh the expected punishments against the expected rewards and then engage in the behavior based on the balance between the two. In order to deter criminal behavior, Beccaria argued that the punishments must be swift, certain, and severe, meaning that the offender must expect punishment to occur soon, every time, and in proportion to the original behavior. Remember that Beccaria also maintained that punishments needed to be fair, otherwise they would be seen as tyrannical and the person would no longer be deterred. Classical theorists proposed two types of deterrence, specific and general. Specific deterrence meant that the individual themselves was deterred from criminal behavior, whereas general deterrence is about deterring other people from criminal behavior by example. Although modern theories have diverged from the original classical theories in some ways, the basic assumptions of deterrence-based theories still hold true in modern versions. Now, one of the challenges for deterrence research is examining the decision-making process that a person goes through before they commit an offense. How do we know that an individual is weighing the punishments versus the rewards? How do we learn what they're focused on in regards to the punishment? Are they thinking about the severity or just the certainty of punishment? Deterrence researchers, along with a majority of other criminologists, have used multiple methods of collecting data to answer these questions. The first studies that were done on an aggregate basis, meaning that researchers were studying behavior at the macro level and they weren't looking at individual people. This method is really helpful for identifying trends, but it makes cause and effect identification very difficult because you never talk to people about their own perceptions and attitudes. Cross-sectional research looks at people at one point in time. The advantage of this type of research is that it can be done at the individual level, meaning you're talking to people about how they think, feel, and act. The most common type of cross-sectional research used for deterrence research is the self-report questionnaire, which asks people to report things about themselves. For example, a cross-sectional study done on people who've been convicted of shoplifting would ask things like, did you expect to get caught before you committed the crime? What type of punishments did you think you would get? The problem here is still the time order. In order to ask people about their criminal activities, you would have to ask them retrospective data, meaning you have to ask them about something from their past. We know that human memory is far from perfect, and asking people to recall things like their thought process before stealing could lead to some misremembered and inaccurate facts. The solution to this type of study was the longitudinal study, where you talk to each person 2 or more times. This allows the researcher to ask about perceptions of stealing at one age and then learn about their criminal behavior at a later date. Now, the problem with this type of study is that perceptions change all the time. You may be certain that you are going to get caught, and then your best friend tells you she committed the same offense and she never got caught. Bam, your perception has changed, and now you're not sure whether you're going to get caught or not. It's very difficult to identify those perceptual changes, particularly for criminal behavior, because we don't know when you're going to commit a crime, so we can't make sure to survey you directly before you engage in the criminal behavior. Some of the best longitudinal studies have followed, or even continue to follow, people for several decades. But most of these research studies involve only 1 or 2 communications a year. You can imagine that your perceptions and your attitudes will change a lot over the course of the year, particularly if you're studying juvenile offenders. Because of this issue, criminologists have also created a 4th type of research study called the vignette research. Vignette research consists of a hypothetical situation and then a series of questions about the scenario. For example, a participant in a vignette study might be asked to read about a potential situation in which the participant is walking down an empty corridor and sees an open door to an office. Inside the office, the participant sees an iPad sitting on a desk. After reading about the situation, the participant would then be asked a series of questions, like, would you go into the office to take the iPad? What's the first thought when you see the iPad? Things like that. The advantage of vignette research, the other studies mentioned, is that it allows us to identify your thought process directly before you engage in a criminal act. Now, the major disadvantage to vignette research is that it's hypothetical and it may promote different answers. It's one thing to read in a vignette scenario that you don't have money to pay your rent. It's another thing when you're actually facing eviction in real life. What you can see from all 4 types of studies is that each has its advantages and its disadvantages. Because of this, proving a theory using multiple studies and multiple research methods will provide us with the best validity. So what have we learned about deterrence since those early days of Beccaria and Bentham? Several important things have been identified using the methods we just discussed. For one, we found that there is an experiential effect on deterrence, meaning that people's perceptions of punishment will change based on their previous experiences. That makes sense. Consider your textbook discussion about drunk driving. It talks about the fact that most drunk drivers drive drunk frequently before they're caught, meaning that they know it is likely that they're going to get away with it. The Center for Disease Control found that people drive an average of 80 trips while impaired before they're actually arrested for drunk driving. Because of that, people consider driving drunk are unlikely to see the punishments of drunk driving as certain, and thus the deterrent effect of any penalty is not very high. The same holds true with white-collar offending. Offenses like tax fraud have a very low identification and prosecution rate, so someone who's been cheating on the taxes in their past is likely to continue to do so, regardless of the penalty, because they perceive the chances of getting caught as very low. The impact of this experiential effect is important because deterrence research has also shown us that when individuals consider the punishments before they act, the certainty of the punishment is more important than the severity of the punishment. So we as a society can keep enhancing the penalties for different behaviors, but if an individual knows that a particular crime type is unlikely to be caught, the sanction will not result in a strong deterrent effect. The last, but probably most significant finding, has arisen from more modern deterrence research, and that's the differentiation between formal and informal deterrence. Formal deterrence occurs from official sources, like the government and the courts. As we've talked about in previous lectures, most of our criminal justice system is based on the idea of formal deterrence, providing punishments that correspond to this crime's severity in hopes of providing a specific and a general deterrence effect. Laws like 3-strike penalties, where you're given a life sentence after 3 felonies, regardless of the crime type, are based on a deterrence philosophy because they provide an official sanction to an undesirable behavior. However, modern research supports the idea of deterrence coming from outside the formal government as well. Called informal deterrence, this type of deterrent effect comes from things or people that are outside of the official realm, like friends, family, work, and school. Most importantly, researchers have found that informal deterrence factors are more effective than formal deterrence factors in changing behavior. This supports the need to look outside of the criminal justice system for effective behavioral change. This new research led to the formation of the rational choice theory, which is first published by Cornish and Clark. Social economics, which is described as the study of decision-making, influenced this theory. Like other classical theories, rational choice theory argues that people analyze the pros and cons of their behavior before actually engaging in criminal activities, and it also emphasizes the use of deterrence. Unlike early classical theorists, however, Cornish and Clark's theory provided for the influence of informal deterrence as well as official deterrence. In fact, researchers studying rational choice theory find that many important deterrents result from informal factors rather than formal factors. These informal factors include the reaction of self and others to the behavior and the expected benefits. As expected, if you perceive that your own self-image will be diminished by the behavior, resulting in reactions such as feeling ashamed or losing your confidence, you're going to be more likely to be deterred from committing that offense. Similarly, if you expect that reaction from others, including your peers, your family, your work, coworkers, or your school environment, you also think those are going to be negative, then you're more likely to be deterred from committing the offense. Finally, in parallel with the early classical theorists' idea of weighing pros and cons, researchers suggest that having expectations of large benefits from the crime will make you more likely to engage in the criminal behavior. Cohen and Felson's 1979 routine activities theory is one of the most common examples of modern-day classical theory. In their theory, Cohen and Felson proposed that criminal offending occurs when a criminal makes a rational choice to engage in crime. In particular, they argue that a crime is most likely to be committed when three elements align at a single place and time. The three elements Cohen and Felsen identified were a motivated offender, a suitable target, and a lack of guardianship. One of the things that made routine activities theory unique was its emphasis on the spontaneity of crime. Rather than arguing that people are predisposed or plan out their criminal behavior in advance, Cohen and Felsen's theory suggested that a crime was more the result of a snap decision by an offender. They used the word motivated offender, suggesting that not everyone would engage in crime under the same circumstances. Remember, that's one of the limitations of several social theories, like social disorganization, because the same environment can produce offenders and non-offenders. However, Cohen and Felsen did not elaborate on what specifically creates a motivated offender versus a normal person, so it's often used in conjunction with another theory to provide the motivational component. If you assume a motivated offender, though, Cohen and Felsen's theory is that the person will take advantage of a situation in which there's a suitable target, meaning someone or something that appears vulnerable, and a lack of guardianship. Felsen and Eck have done some subsequent expansions to the original theory, eventually resulting in the crime triangle that you see depicted on this slide. One of the key revisions you'll notice is that instead of the three original concepts, offender, target, and guardian, in the center of the triangle, their expansions propose that there are three different types of guardians, all who serve as deterrent for criminal elements. These three individuals are known collectively as controllers. The handler is someone who can deter the offender from committing the offense, essentially removing that motivation. Sometimes this is used in accordance with social bonding theory, with the handlers being intimate persons in the offender's life, whereas other times this handler represents a formal control, like a community supervision officer. The guardian role is dedicated to protecting the victim, much like the original theory, and the manager role is dedicated to protecting the location. Several crime reduction policies have resulted from this conceptualization of routine activities theory. Aside from programs that aim to reduce offender motivation through strong handler relationships, routine activities theory suggests that interventions aimed at improving guardian presence or manager presence can also reduce crime. For example, a college campus program where you can request a security guard escort late at night would provide a guardian for the victim, reducing the vulnerability of the target. Similarly, putting a security guard at the entrance to the store would provide a guardian against violent activity and shoplifting. In his 1994 dissertation, Drug Markets and Places, Eck proposed that the manager of a location, such as a store or a restaurant, could put into place practices that were to serve to protect the place from criminal activity even before the offender and the victim converge in time and space. This could be as simple as a manager hiring a security guard for his place of business, but it also could be more complicated, such as arranging the layout of a store in a particular way or installing security cameras to protect against theft. Managers can also, by their own presence, serve as guardians for the victims. So these roles are interchangeable to some extent as well. So what types of policies do the theories in this chapter suggest? Well, like early classical theories, the focus is on a rational, free-thinking offender, and that means that policies based on deterrence research should aim at altering the pros and the cons for criminal behavior. Rational choice theory suggests the best policies are those that focus on increasing informal deterrence. Things like shaming penalties are done in the hope that creating negative reactions from your peers and your family members will deter your future criminal behavior, although there's been a lack of research on this topic. As noted earlier, another intervention based on rational choice theory are three-strike policies, where the offenders are given a life sentence on their third felony charge, regardless of the actual charge itself. Proponents argue that an offender, faced with a lifetime punishment, will refrain from engaging in criminal behavior. However, researchers have found little support for the deterrent effect of these types of sanctions, and critics argue they may actually increase harm under the assumption that the offender becomes more motivated to eliminate witnesses to his or her crimes. Routine activities theory suggests that we focus on strengthening controllers to reduce crimes, meaning that we should provide guardians, better handlers, and/or more effective managers. As discussed in the previous slide, things like adding video cameras, adding security alarms or guards, establishing a buddy system, and other interventions can be used to reduce criminal opportunities under this theory. That completes the Contemporary Classical and Deterrence Research lecture. By now, you should have a good understanding of modern deterrence research, including Cornish and Clark's rational choice theory and Cohen and Felson's routine activities theory. Thanks for watching.